What if I told you that somewhere at the edge of the world, shrouded in fog, on a forgotten island, a real battleship is standing right now? Not on the water, inside a mountain. This is not a metaphor. This is not an exaggeration. Literally, naval guns immured in the rock. Turrets weighing 200 tons, fused into concrete. Tunnels 40 meters deep, plunging into the very heart of the island. This place is called Battery Number 26, Askold Island, and almost no one knows it exists. Japanese admirals feared this place like a nightmare. American intelligence spent years trying to find it. The USSR spent millions on it and told no one. And then they simply abandoned it. They walked away and left it all to rot in the fog. I spent months digging through archives, talking to people who were there, and what I learned is hard to wrap your head around. This is a story of how a decommissioned ship turned into an impenetrable fortress, about the people who spent the best years of their lives underground, waiting for a war that never came, about a victory that no one ever celebrated, and about a betrayal, quiet, without a single shot, when a country simply turned its back and walked away. Watch until the end, because at the finale, I will tell you something that is still not officially talked about, and I will show you what most people have never seen: the Sea of Japan. The fog is so thick that you can't see 10 meters ahead. The water is black, cold, and somewhere up ahead, a rock. Just a rock, an ordinary one. There are thousands like it here, but this one is different. If you get closer, you will feel it before you see it. A slight vibration in the air, the smell of machine oil soaked into the stone over decades, and a silence, not a natural one, but something else. The kind of silence that only exists where something massive has been quiet for a long time. Then you see the steel. It protrudes directly from the cliff. Gray, covered in rust, but still monumental. This is a gun barrel, 180 millimeter caliber, more than 9 meters long. A single shell weighs as much as an adult brown bear, and it can fly 37 kilometers. The mountain is armed. Now imagine there are 4 of these barrels. Imagine that behind them are concrete vaults several meters thick, capable of withstanding a direct hit from an aerial bomb. Imagine that under your feet are tunnels 40 meters deep, leading to the heart of the island. A power station, a command post, living quarters, an entire underground city, and all of it feeds 4 barrels looking out to sea. This isn't just a battery. This is a ship, a real warship, just without water under its keel. Japanese admirals called it a nightmare. American intelligence searched for it for years, and no one found it until it was too late. Battery Number 26, Askold Island, the Pacific Ocean. It was built never to fire in earnest, and that is exactly its main victory. But behind this victory stand thousands of people who were never asked. Decisions made in Moscow offices thousands of kilometers away, and guns that had another life, before they were entombed in the mountain. Today, we go inside. But to understand why a mountain became a battleship, we must first understand what that battleship was. There are things that man creates, and then frightens himself with what he has made. The MB-2 180 turret mount. Remember that name, because once you understand what it is, you will look at that cliff with completely different eyes. Let's start with the numbers, but not as a dry list. Let's make you feel them. The caliber is 180 millimeters. For comparison, that's roughly the diameter of a standard bucket. Only it's not a bucket. It's a maw into which a shell weighing 97 kilograms is loaded. Nearly 100 weight of metal and explosives. An adult man weighs less. The firing range is 37 kilometers. Imagine, you are standing in the city center. This gun can hit a suburb on the other side of the metropolitan area, and do it before you can blink. The shell flies for nearly a minute. A minute. While somewhere far away, people don't even know it's already in the air. The muzzle velocity is about 900 meters per second. That's nearly 3 times the speed of sound. You won't hear the shot before the shell finds you. But the numbers aren't everything. Each turret weighs over 200 tons. 200 tons of steel, mechanics, and precision optics. And all of it rotates. Smoothly, almost silently, on special roller paths. The turret can traverse 200 degrees and lock onto a target faster than you can spin on your heels. People work inside the turret. Several men. in a cramped space smelling of oil, gunpowder, and iron, where everyone knows their role: loader, layer, gun commander. They work as a single mechanism, because one mistake means the turret doesn't fire, and the turret must fire. Two such turrets, on one battery, separated by 170 meters, so that a single hit cannot destroy both at once. This isn't an accident. This is the cold engineering logic of people who understood very well who they would be shooting at, and who would be shooting back. You might ask, where did they get such guns? You don't make them in a factory like bolts. This isn't a part, it's a masterpiece of industrial art. And this is where the story gets interesting. In the 1930s, the Soviet Union desperately wanted a big fleet. Battleships, cruisers, power on the water. Stalin personally signed the shipbuilding programs. Money flowed. Factories worked. Turrets and guns for new ships were designed and manufactured. But a fleet is expensive. Very expensive. And while ships were still being built or already becoming obsolete, the guns remained. The turrets were removed. And someone very clever in the People's Commissariat of Defense realized a simple truth. Why sink a gun with a ship if you can bury it in the ground? The Earth doesn't sink. The Earth doesn't burn. The Earth doesn't dodge torpedoes. The Earth just stands there and watches the sea. But these guns had one problem. They had already been to war, and they had lost. Not in battle, no. They lost to the system, to programs that changed, to ships that were never finished, to decisions made at the top and handed down like a sentence. The guns were removed, packed, shipped. Their new home was thousands of kilometers from Moscow, on an island hidden in fog for most of the year, on a cliff above a cold sea. And there, work awaited them. Moscow, 1930s, the Kremlin. Stalin stands over a map. Not a small map, a massive one. One where you can see everything at once. Europe on the left, Asia on the right. And somewhere at the very edge, where the map almost ends, a thin strip of Soviet coastline on the Pacific. Vladivostok, the Far East, the edge of the world. He looks at this edge for a long time, because from that edge, eyes are looking back at him. Japan, a country that, over the last half-century, had defeated China, defeated Russia, annexed Korea, and occupied Manchuria. A country with one of the strongest fleets in the world. A country watching very closely what happens on Soviet shores. And here is the question that gives no peace. How to cover this edge? A fleet is the obvious answer. Ships against ships. But a fleet takes years to build. It takes shipyards, steel, specialists that are in short supply. It takes money that is never enough. And ships can be sunk. There is another answer. More Soviet, cheaper, and, as history would show, more reliable. Coastal artillery. The idea wasn't new. Even under the Tsars, Russia built coastal batteries, from the Gulf of Finland to Vladivostok. Forts, turrets, guns in stone. But now it was about a different scale. About batteries that could stop not just a single ship, but an entire fleet. For this, you need guns. Big guns. Like the ones already available. In the Soviet naval programs of the 30s, there were several battleships and cruisers whose fates were unfortunate. Some were never finished. Others became obsolete before they even went on combat duty. Others fell under the knife of yet another military doctrine revision. The ships died, but the turrets and guns remained. Removing a turret from a ship isn't just unscrewing a bolt. It's months of work for engineers, cranes, and special brigades. A turret weighs hundreds of tons. It must be carefully dismantled, transported, and reinstalled, so that the precision mechanics inside are not damaged. It's difficult, but it's possible, and it's cheaper than building a new ship. The logic is brutal in its simplicity. A ship can sail away. It can be sunk, captured, or break down in the open sea. But a mountain goes nowhere. The mountain stands. The mountain waits. And if you put naval guns inside a mountain, You get something that lacks the weaknesses of a fleet, but possesses all its firepower. This is how Battery Number 26 was born. The location was chosen carefully. Askold Island, small, rocky, covered in fog most of the year. Positioned so that it controls several strategic entrances to the bays at once. Ussuri Bay, Strelok Bay, Vostok Bay. Any ship heading toward Vladivostok from the south would find itself within striking range. The Japanese understood this. Soviet strategists understood this. Everyone understood. All that remained was to build it. The order was signed on July 13, 1936. That same day, the first people arrived on the island. No one asked them if they wanted to go. 2 construction battalions, hundreds of men. Some were military engineers, some were not. The island met them with fog, rock, and a total lack of infrastructure. No roads, no housing, no machinery, hardly any. Just the rock. And the mission. Tunnel through this rock, lay the concrete, install the turrets, make it all work. The deadline, as fast as possible, because across the sea, the Japanese fleet was not standing still. And this is where the story stops being a history of political decisions and becomes a story of people. People who took tools in their hands and went into the mountain, literally. Imagine a cliff, not a picturesque postcard cliff, but a real one. Gray, wet, so hard that a normal tool bounces off it like iron. The fog settles on your clothes and never dries. The sea wind is constant, salty, and piercing. And somewhere inside this rock, you have to lay tunnels. Not narrow crevices, full-scale tunnels. Wide enough for people with equipment to pass through, high enough to work in. Descending to a depth of 40 meters, down where you can no longer hear the sea or the wind. Only the rhythm of tools and the breathing of the people next to you. This was called a deep-seated gallery, Poterna, the main artery of the entire system. A rock corridor that connected everything. The turret blocks, the power station, the command post. If the battery is a living organism, the Poterna is its spine. Excavation was done by hand and with explosives. First, the shafts, then the placement of charges, then the blast, then clearing the rubble. And again, day after day, meter by meter. The rock resisted. It always resists. Cracks went the wrong way. The rock crumbled. Groundwater found gaps and seeped inside. Men worked in dust, in darkness, by the light of flashlights and portable lamps. Lungs were clogged with stone dust. Hands were beaten bloody. No one kept statistics on injuries, or if they did, they haven't survived. And above, while some hammered the rock from below, others prepared the positions for the turrets. 2 turret blocks, separated by 170 meters. Each one, a 2-story underground structure of concrete and steel. The first floor, mechanics, ammunition, shell hoisting systems. The second floor, the turret roller path itself, onto which the entire 200-ton gun turret construction sits. Above it, a concrete vault. Thick. Very thick. The concrete was poured in layers. Each layer was seasoned, checked, and then the next was poured. Rebar ran for kilometers. All of this had to be delivered to the island, by sea, in any weather. Storms here are not rare. Fog is the norm. Supply was a constant headache. A separate block for the power station was built. A battery cannot function without electricity. Turrets are rotated by electric motors. Shells are fed by mechanical elevators. Communication runs on technology. All of this requires energy. Its own autonomous energy, independent of external lines. Because in the event of an attack, external lines are the first to be destroyed. And also the command and observation post. It is positioned separately, 870 meters from the main blocks. Up there, above the cliff, behind armored glass, the eyes of the battery. Rangefinders, optics, people watching the sea and transmitting target coordinates down into the tunnels, where the crews already stand at the guns. All of this is connected by the Poterna. All of this is hidden underground or under concrete. Outside, almost nothing. Only the rock. Only the fog. And 4 barrels looking out to sea. Engineers calculated, a direct hit from a 500-kilogram aerial bomb would not break this structure. The Japanese knew this, and that is exactly why they never tried to attack it head-on. Why crawl onto a rock that cannot be destroyed? By 1938, 2 years after construction began, the battery was commissioned. Not fully finished, work still continued, but already combat ready, already on duty, already watching the sea. Because the sea would not wait. The final works were completed in 1939. The Paterna was finished. All blocks connected. The power station launched. The turrets checked. They rotate. The guns elevate and depress. The shell feeding mechanisms work. The battery is ready. For 3 years, people hammered the rock to hide a ship inside it, and they succeeded. Now, all that remained was to wait. Imagine waking up every morning with one thought. Today, the war might start. Not an abstract war somewhere far away, but a war here, right behind this rock, right behind this fog. The Japanese fleet is only a few hours sail away. This isn't paranoia. It's a fact repeated to you at every briefing. You know the range of the Japanese guns. You know how many ships are in the nearest ports. You know that if they come, you will be among the first to see them. And among the first they will open fire upon. This was life at Battery Number 26, since 1938, every single day. The battery's garrison consisted of several dozen people, officers, gun crews, signalmen, mechanics, technical staff, different people. Some came here by assignment, some by order, some due to circumstances best not asked about. Askold Island is not a resort. It's a place where you come to serve, and where you stay for a long time. Life was harsh. Winter on the island is not the winter people are used to in central Russia. The Sea of Japan is angry. The wind from the ocean never stops. The temperature drops below 0 and stays there for months. The fog, it's almost constant here, turns into freezing drizzle in winter. Clothes never dry. Metal freezes through and through. But below, in the tunnels, a different world, a constant temperature. It's quiet. There is no wind, no snow, only the smell of concrete, oil, and metal. People who spent enough time in these tunnels say you start to feel like part of the mountain. You stop thinking about the sea. You stop thinking about the sky. There is only darkness, the light of lamps, and work. Service followed a schedule. Wake up, formation, gun check, drills, another check, another drill. The turrets were rotated dry, so the mechanisms wouldn't seize. The guns were lowered and raised, so the hydraulics stayed alive. Communication with command? On schedule. Report? On schedule. Everything. On schedule. Because a schedule is the only thing that keeps people in shape when nothing is happening around them. And nothing happened for a very long time. 1938. In Western Europe, Hitler annexes Austria. Then, the Sudetenland. Then, all of Czechoslovakia. The world is moving toward a great war. Everyone feels it. But on Askold Island, the main threat comes from the other side, Japan. In 1938, Soviet and Japanese troops clashed at Lake Khasan, not far from here. Several weeks of fighting, losses on both sides. Then, a truce. But the tension never left. High alert was declared at the battery. The crews took their positions. The guns were aimed. For several days, the men did not leave the turrets. They slept right in the combat compartments, in jackets, without taking off their boots. Then everything went quiet. Again. 1939. Khalkhin Gol. Soviet and Japanese troops fight again, this time in Mongolia. Zhukov smashes the Japanese army. Losses are monstrous. Again, a truce. Again, tension remains. High alert again on the island. Crews back at the guns. More sleepless nights in the tunnels. Again, nothing. And so it went, time after time. September 1939. Germany attacks Poland. World War II begins. But the Japanese don't touch Soviet positions yet. They have their own war. China, Southeast Asia, the Pacific Ocean. June 22, 1941. Germany attacks the USSR. The entire Soviet West is burning. Armies are retreating. Cities are falling. The country is bleeding out. And on Askold Island, silence. Do you understand the horror of this silence? While millions die in the West, here, men stand at the guns and wait. Waiting for a strike that could come at any moment. Japan and the USSR are formally not at war, but no one knows for how long. In Tokyo, debates rage. Strike Siberia from the east while the Germans press from the west? Or focus on the Pacific? In December 1941, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. The war in the Pacific begins. The American fleet is crushed. The Japanese army moves across all of Asia. Singapore, the Philippines, Burma. The Japanese empire expands with incredible speed. And the Soviet Far East is right there, within reach. On the battery, they know this. Everyone on the battery knows this. The Japanese fleet is now fighting in the open, and it is very strong. If Japan decides to strike Vladivostok, battery number 26 will be on the front line. The crews do not leave the guns, but there is no strike. Japan chooses a different direction. The Soviet-Japanese neutrality pact holds, for now. A shaky balance. Thin ice over the abyss. Years pass. 1942, 1943, 1944. The war in the West turns. Stalingrad, Kursk. Soviet armies begin the offensive. Germany retreats. The end is in sight, though not close. And on the island, the same watch, the same tunnels, the same fog. People change. Some leave, others arrive. But the battery remains. It stands. It waits. It looks at the sea. And then, 1945, May. Germany surrenders. The war in Europe is over. The whole world exhales. But in the Pacific, the war continues. Vicious, bloody, with no end in sight. August 1945. The USSR declares war on Japan. Soviet armies cross the border into Manchuria. The Pacific Fleet puts to sea. At battery number 26, combat alarm. Not a drill. The real thing. The crews take their positions at the guns. The turrets rotate. The guns are aimed. The shell-feeding mechanisms are in a state of readiness. Signalmen hold the line with command. Observers at the command post look at the sea, without blinking. 7 years of waiting. This is it. Fingers on the firing mechanisms. The sea is silent. The order to open fire never came. The Japanese fleet did not come. Not because it couldn't, but because it knew. It knew that behind this fog stood something waiting for it. Something that had no weak spots. Something that would not miss. The battery won, without firing a single shot. It sounds strange, to win and not fire. But that is exactly the logic of deterrence. The most terrifying weapon is the one you don't have to use, because the enemy already knows they will lose. 7 years, thousands of shifts, thousands of hours in the tunnels, thousands of cups of tea drunk in the combat compartments while the sea roared outside. All of this so that nothing would happen. And nothing happened. The war ended, but the battery remained. Because peace in the Pacific was a very relative concept. September 1945. Japan signed the surrender. World War II was over. The world celebrated. People cried with joy on the streets of Moscow, London, New York. Soldiers returned home. On Askold Island, they celebrated too. Modestly, as people who spent the war waiting for the war know how to celebrate. They drank, they talked, they looked at the sea, and then they went back on duty. Because the peace had ended, but the threat had not. Only the threat looked different now. It wore a different uniform. It spoke a different language. While Soviet soldiers were returning from the Western fronts, a new reality was unfolding in the East. The American fleet, having just crushed Japan, now dominated the Pacific. Carrier strike groups, battleships, submarines. All of this was now very close, and looking in the same direction the Japanese fleet had looked a few years prior. In Moscow, they understood this. In headquarters, they calculated this. In secret reports, they wrote this. The Far East was under threat again. Battery number 26 didn't just stay. It became more important than before. Because the American fleet was not the Japanese fleet of 1941. It was something fundamentally different. Aircraft carriers could strike from hundreds of kilometers away. Planes could arrive before ships even appeared on the horizon. Nuclear weapons. The Americans had already shown they knew how to use them. Could destroy a city in one blow. It would seem, what is the point of keeping a coastal battery in the age of aircraft carriers and atomic bombs? But Soviet military logic thought otherwise. As long as the battery stands, it creates a problem. Any fleet planning an operation in this area is forced to account for it. Forced to allocate forces to suppress it. Forced to risk ships in its zone of reach. This isn't just guns and a rock. It's an element of a system that makes an attack expensive. Very expensive. And the battery remained. The garrison remained. The duty continued. But now, under new conditions. The Cold War brought new technology to the island. Radars, more modern communication systems, updated aiming complexes. The Soviet military industry, despite post-war ruin, was working. The fleet received new ships. The army, new weapons. The battery was modernized. Not radically. The MB-2180 turrets remained the same, but everything around them became more modern, more accurate, faster. And on the other side of the sea, American intelligence. Here is what's interesting. Soviet coastal fortifications in the Far East were one of the highest priority targets for American military intelligence in the 1950s. They needed to know where the batteries were, what their caliber was, what their range was, how they were covered from the air. Because in the event of war, and the Pentagon perfectly understood such a war was possible, these batteries had to be destroyed in the first hours. Reconnaissance planes flew along the Soviet coast. Submarines approached the shore as closely as they dared. Human intelligence tried to get any information about the fortifications. On the battery, they knew this. On the battery, they always knew when strangers were near. Radars tracked the planes. Observers at the command post logged suspicious vessels. Each such case, a report up the chain of command. Each report into a folder. The folders into the archive. The Cold War was fought not only with missiles and spies. It was fought like this, by the daily tension of people standing at guns and staring into the fog. Who knew that somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, someone was staring back? It exhausts you differently than a real war. In a real war, there is at least clarity. The enemy is visible. The goal is clear. It's either you or him. Here, nothing. Only the fog. Only the waiting. Only the understanding that everything can change in a few minutes, and yet doesn't change for years. People served here for 2, 3, 4 years. Some longer. Officers arrived with families, or left families on the mainland, and lived on the island alone. Connection with the mainland, rare supply runs, mail, occasionally radio. The island is small. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows everything about each other. It brings people closer and simultaneously weighs them down. When there is nowhere to go, A person either finds balance or breaks. They broke. This isn't talked about in official histories, but people who served at such sites remember. Breakdowns happened. Quiet ones, without drama. A person would simply stop leaving their compartment, or start hearing sounds that weren't there, or stare at the sea for hours and speak to no one. Commanders knew how to work with this. There was an unwritten instruction: don't press, don't break them, give the person time. Work heals. The schedule holds you. The collective pulls you out. Sometimes it pulled them out. One of the officers who served here in the 1960s recalled, and this memory very accurately describes what this service was. He said, "We understood that our main weapon was not the guns. Our main weapon was what the enemy knew about us. He knows we are here. He knows we are ready. As long as he knows this, he won't come." But we also understood something else. If the order to fire actually comes, it means deterrence has failed. It means the war has already started. And we will likely be among the first to know, because we will be struck first. They lived with this understanding. Every day, every watch. Every morning when they woke up and looked out the porthole at the fog over the sea. Is it scary, knowing your life is part of an equation where you are not the main variable? Probably. But they didn't leave. They served. They kept the watch. They kept the battery in combat readiness. 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. The world changed rapidly. Ballistic missiles appeared. Now you could destroy a city without bringing a single ship near it. Nuclear submarines appeared. Ghosts that no one saw until they chose to be seen. Satellites appeared. Now every square meter of Earth could be photographed from space. It would seem a coastal battery with 1930s guns looks like an archaism in this world. But it still stood. It still pulled its weight. Because wars are won not only by the most modern weapons. Wars are won by systems. And battery number 26 was part of a system. A multi-layered, echeloned Soviet defense of the Far East. Remove one element, and a gap appears in the system. Gaps were not allowed. 1980s. The Soviet Union slowly entered a crisis it didn't yet fully realize. The economy creaked. Afghanistan drained strength. Political leadership changed with frightening speed. But on Askold Island, everything went according to schedule. Wake up. Gun check. Drills. Report. More drills. Fog over the sea. And 4 barrels, still looking toward the horizon. To where visibility ends and the open ocean begins. They served here for decades. They were ready to die here. But what happened in the end was something they couldn't have imagined in their worst nightmares. There is a type of death that no one expects. Not from a bullet. Not from an explosion. Not from a storm or fire. But from the fact that one morning, simply no one arrives. The keys remain in the lock. The lights in the tunnels go out. And the silence, which used to be a working pause between shifts, becomes permanent. Battery number 26 died exactly like that. But let's go in order, because this story deserves to be told correctly. 1985. Mikhail Gorbachev becomes General Secretary of the CPSU. Perestroika begins. A word that initially sounds like a promise, and gradually turns into a premonition of catastrophe. The country begins to change faster than it can process those changes. On Askold Island, the same duty. Wake up. Gun check. Drills. Report. Fog. People who served here in the late 80s say the changes weren't felt immediately. First, just talk. Officers discuss news from the mainland in low voices after lights out. Something is happening. Something big. Incomprehensible. A bit unsettling. Then the supply interruptions began. This was concrete and tangible. Not abstract politics, but reality. The supply ship is late. Spare parts take longer than usual. The food ration is slightly smaller than it should be. Small things, but on an isolated island, small things matter. 1989. The Berlin Wall falls. The Eastern Bloc crumbles. Warsaw-packed countries one by one exit the Soviet orbit. The world that seemed unshakable turns out to be anything but. On the battery, they discussed this. They argued. Some said, "It's nothing, we'll survive, the country is handled worse." Some stayed silent. Some wrote letters home, long, detailed ones, as if in a hurry to record something important. 1991. January. February. March. The country was bursting at the seams. This was no longer hidden. The Baltics demanded independence. The economy collapsed. Lines for food in the cities. This wasn't the Soviet past anymore. It was the Soviet present. June 1991. The battery received an order to conduct training and combat firing. This was a familiar task. Firing was conducted regularly, to check combat readiness, to train the crews, so that mechanisms that had been silent for a long time didn't forget their work. They fired into the sea, at dummy targets, loud, powerful, so that the cliff shuddered and seagulls took flight for kilometers. But that time, something was different. Maybe people felt it, or maybe it's hindsight casting a special light on memories. But those who were there say, there was a certain special seriousness in those drills. Commanders were pointedly precise in their orders. The crews worked flawlessly. Everything was done as if it wasn't a drill. But something more important. The turrets rotated. The guns rose to the elevation angle. The loading mechanisms rammed the shells into the chambers. The breeches closed with that characteristic heavy sound you can't mistake for anything else. Command, fire. The shot of a coastal battery is not something you can describe with words. You have to feel it. The shockwave passes through concrete, through stone, through your body. For a fraction of a second, the air in the tunnels feels compressed. Then, a deafening roar that rolls over the sea and reflects off the water. Then, silence. A heavy, ringing silence in which you can only hear the settling of disturbed dust. A shell weighing nearly 100 weight heads into the sea, over 30 kilometers away. They fired what was required, checked, recorded the results. Those were the last training and combat shots in the history of Battery Number 26. No one knew it for sure then, but many felt it. August 19th, 1991, Moscow. The GKCHP announces a seizure of power. Tanks take to the streets of the capital. 3 days of uncertainty, and the putsch fails. But something irreversible has already happened. December 25th, 1991. The red flag is lowered over the Kremlin. The Soviet Union ceases to exist. The country that built the battery vanished. At that moment, guards still stood on Askold Island. Communication still worked. Someone still went on duty and looked at the sea. By inertia. By habit. Because no one gave the order to stop. And without an order, you don't stop. The order came in 1992. Battery number 26 is disbanded. 4 words in an official document. 4 words, and 55 years of history are closed like a book. People packed their things, walked through the tunnels for the last time, looked at the turrets for the last time. Massive, cold, still ready for battle, even though the battle would never come. They went to the shore, boarded the ships, and sailed away. The ammunition could not be left behind. Shells for guns of this caliber represent a serious danger. Removal began in the mid-90s. Slowly, difficultly, expensively. The island is far away. Logistics were heavy. The state that built the battery with the grandeur of the Soviet Empire now struggled to find money to dismantle it. The ammunition was removed over several years. And this is where what is not officially talked about begins. According to some data, part of the shells remained on the island. Not because they were forgotten, but because not everything can be removed quickly and carefully. Exactly where, no one officially says. Documents are classified or lost. The island is now uninhabited. Getting there is not easy. The objects were mothballed. This means the doors were welded shut, ventilation shafts closed, the minimum of what is required to ensure a strategic object doesn't become just an open hole in the ground, was done. And then they left for good. The island emptied. 55 years. 2 construction battalions hammering the rock in 1936. Officers and soldiers spending the best years of their lives here. Cold winters and foggy summers. High alerts that ended in nothing. Waiting for a war that never came. The last shots, after which the guns fell silent forever. All of this was now history. And history, as we know, knows how to keep secrets. The military left. And then other people came, with flashlights and with tools. There is a word, looting, a harsh word, a military one, usually applied to those who rob under fire, among ruins, while the bodies are still warm. But there is another kind of looting, quiet, methodical, without shooting or haste. When the site is already abandoned, there is no guard, and all that remains is to walk in and take. Exactly that began on Askold Island in the mid-90s. First came the locals. Fishermen who knew the island, knew the military had left, knew there was a lot left behind. Non-ferrous metal, copper, bronze, aluminum, was worth money. Good money by the standards of the 90s, when the country was falling apart, factories were idle, and people were looking for any way to survive. The wires were the first to go. Kilometers of copper cable laid through all the tunnels. That was money. Real, tangible money that could be turned into a scrapyard on the mainland. The cable was cut quickly, loaded onto boats, taken away. Then they reached the mechanics. The MB2-180 turrets are complex mechanical systems. Inside them are bearings, gears, hydraulic elements, electric motors. All of this is made of non-ferrous metals. All of it is worth money. Getting to this is harder than cutting cable. You need tools. You need time. You need an understanding of how the mechanism is built. People with tools were found, and with time, and with understanding. The armor plates were not touched. You can't carry them off, and you can't melt them in a garage. The concrete vaults, obviously, remained. But everything that could be unscrewed, cut, broken, and carried away was carried away. Imagine this. Engineers in the 30s carefully designed every node. Workers in the tunnels laid every cable. Mechanics checked every bearing. People put their health, years of their lives, sometimes, life itself, into this. All so the machine would work precisely and reliably. And now, other people have come and are taking it all apart. Not out of malice, simply because they need to eat. Because there are no other options. Because the state that built all this vanished and warned no one what would come next. This isn't an excuse, but it is an explanation. By the end of the 90s, little of the battery's internal equipment remained. The tunnels emptied. The turret mechanisms were partially dismantled. The electrical systems were ripped out by the roots. Living quarters, the few items the military left in their hasty departure, were scavenged or simply thrown away. The rock remained. The concrete remained. The turrets, massive, steel, too heavy for looters, remained. The gun barrels, still looking at the sea, remained. But inside, emptiness. It was at this time that other people appeared on the scene. Stalkers. This word in the Russian language acquired a special meaning after the Strugatsky brothers' novel and Tarkovsky's film. People who go into forbidden zones. Not for metal, for history, for the feeling. To touch something that officially no longer exists. The Far East in the 90s and 2000s became a real paradise for such people. Dozens of abandoned military sites. Batteries, bunkers, arsenals, radar stations, all left without guards, without status, without a future. Walk in and look. The first people to enter battery number 26 after the military left described it like this. The silence inside the tunnels was absolute. Not the silence of an empty house, where you can still hear people living behind the wall. A different silence. A mountain silence. The kind that existed here for millions of years before humans hammered the first shaft into the rock, and which returned as soon as humans left. Flashlights illuminated concrete walls with trickles of moisture, rusty hinges of torn-off doors, pieces of cable dropped by those who didn't have time or couldn't take them. On the floor, trash left by the military during their departure and by looters during their slow plunder. But the turrets stood. I found a man who was one of the first to enter there after the military left. A researcher, a photographer, a man who dedicated years to documenting the abandoned military sites of the Far East. What he told me is hard to wrap your head around. According to him, when they entered the tunnels for the first time, there was still a sense of presence. Not mystical, physical. The air held the smell of machine oil and human habitation. On one of the tables in the technical compartment lay a manual for servicing the gun. Paper, in a cardboard cover, published in the 1950s. The pages were yellowed, but the text was readable. Someone simply forgot to take it, or decided it was no longer needed. In the living compartment, there was a mug, an ordinary enamel mug, like those in every Soviet barracks, white with a blue rim. On its side, a crack from time or an impact. It stood on the edge of a shelf, the way you put a mug down when you leave for a minute and intend to return. The owner did not return. He photographed that mug. Then he looked at it for a long time. And then he said something I remembered. He said, "Do you know what the most terrifying thing about these places is? Not the ruin, not the darkness, not the fact that everything is looted. The most terrifying thing is the things that remained. Because everything is a person. A person who held it in their hands, who lived here, who thought this place was part of their life. And it turned out to be just a point on a map that was one day crossed out." I thought about this for a long time, and then I started thinking about this. A few hours' sail from Askold Island is Ruski Island. There stands another coastal battery with turret guns of the same class, the Voroshilov battery. Built around the same time, armed with similar guns, pulling similar duty. But the Voroshilov battery today is a museum, a living, working museum, with tours, preserved mechanisms, with turrets that can still be put into motion. School children, tourists, military history enthusiasts go there. There are caretakers who tell the story. There is light in the tunnels. Why did one battery become a museum and the other a ruin? The answer is simple and all the more bitter for it. Ruski Island is near Vladivostok. It's easy to get to. It was included in a development zone, received funding, and people who cared arrived. Askold Island is far away. Battery number 26 is a ruin. The tunnels are open to all winds. The mechanisms are stripped. Getting there is difficult, and most people will never make it. The difference between a museum and a ruin isn't a difference in the object's value. It's the difference in whether someone was found who cared. That is what I think about when I stand mentally at the entrance to this tunnel. Not about war, not about the Japanese fleet, not about Soviet military doctrine. I think about people. About the person who left a mug on the table and didn't return. About the soldier who in 1945 sat at the gun with fingers on the trigger and waited for an order that didn't come. But before we put a full stop, I want you to understand one thing. What is hidden in these tunnels is more than just metal and concrete. There is a question that this mountain asks everyone who enters it. Not aloud, not with words, just by the silence of the tunnels, the cold of the concrete, the rust of the guns that never fired at a real enemy. The question hangs in the air, which smells of stone and old metal. And it sounds something like this. What was it all for? Let's try to answer honestly. Battery number 26 was built with one goal: to prevent war. Not to win a war, not to destroy an enemy, but to ensure the enemy wouldn't even try to start one. This is called deterrence. Cold, calculated, absolutely inhuman in its logic, and at the same time, strangely enough, the most humane of all military decisions. Because a battery that never fired at living ships is a battery that worked. It stood here for 55 years. 2 construction battalions hammered the rock to build it. Hundreds of people spent the best years of their lives here, in the tunnels, in the fog, in the expectation of a war that never came. They didn't know if it would pass them by. They didn't know if deterrence would work. They simply stood on duty and did their job. It requires a special kind of courage to stand in a place that, in the event of war, will become the first target, and to know it, and to stand there anyway. But then came 1991, and it turned out that the country that built the battery with the grandeur of an empire had no money to preserve it, no people who cared, no system that could decide what to do with it. The military left. Looters came. The wires were cut. Mechanisms dismantled. Cable turned into scrap. And from a machine built over years, maintained over decades, a living organism, only a rock with empty tunnels remained. And a mug on the table. Here lives the main paradox of this story. The battery won without firing once. It fulfilled its mission completely. The fleet did not come. The war did not start. Vladivostok did not burn. The people who lived in this region, they likely never thought about Askold Island. They didn't know battery number 26 existed. They didn't know that somewhere in the fog, on a cliff above a cold sea, men were standing and holding the horizon in their sights. This is the purest form of victory, the one no one knows about, the one no one celebrated, the one that entered no textbook. And that is exactly why it vanished. Because victories no one knows about have no one to defend them. No one to say, this is important, this must be preserved, this is part of our history. People protect what they remember. And what was hidden from everyone, 55 years under a secrecy seal, in the fog on a distant island, that remains hidden. Only now, no longer by the state, but simply by oblivion. Compare the 2 islands. Ruski Island, near Vladivostok. The Voroshilov battery there became a museum, living, working. The turrets rotate, tours happen. School children touch the guns with their hands. History survived, because someone made the decision to preserve it. Askold Island, far away. Battery number 26, a ruin. Tunnels open to the elements. Mechanisms scavenged. Getting there is hard, and most people will never reach it. The difference between a museum and a ruin is not a difference in the value of the site. It is the difference in whether someone was found who cared. That is what I think about when I stand mentally at the entrance to this tunnel. Not about war, not about the Japanese fleet, not about Soviet military doctrine. I think about people, about the person who left the mug on the table and never came back, about the soldier who in 1945 sat at the gun with his fingers on the trigger and waited for an order that never came, about the engineer who calculated the thickness of the concrete vaults and knew his calculations had to withstand a direct hit, about the builder who struck the rock in 1936, in the cold, in the dark, in the unknown. What do you think about? Be sure to write your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for your attention.